See you guys.
Hi, everyone. We're just letting everyone get in for a couple minutes.
Hi, everybody. We'll start in just a second. All right, we'll give it one more minute. All right, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Sam Adams. Work here in Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler's office, and we really appreciate you spending some time with us this evening. We're here to have a discussion, and this particular discussion we've focused invitees who have an interest in, expertise in, potentially being social service providers or service providers for designated camping sites. RFPs have not been written, so we're here to sort of go through some conceptual elements and get your feedback. This is the third sort of outreach effort that we've made. The first two outreach Zoom meetings were focused on place-based leaders in community-based organizations, in neighborhood association leaders and liaisons, and business district association leaders and liaisons. Those focused on really asking them to imagine that their part of town would be chosen as a potential site for a designated camping site. And then we went through some of our initial thinking about good neighbor agreements, about some of the attributes of a designated campsite, and what would make them feel, safe to potentially be a geographic host for one of these camping sites. So tonight, again, focused on providers, and I'm going to turn this over to my colleagues, Sky and Sarah and Jeff. Sky, are you going to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sam. So Sky or Skylar Brucker-Knapp, Senior Policy Advisor for Mayor Wheeler, work with Sam and Sarah in the mayor's office doing policy work in this space. And then I'll start the presentation off just as soon as we get a couple more intros. So Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, hi everyone, good evening. It's Sarah Morrissey, Mayor Wheeler's Deputy Chief of Staff. She, her, hers pronouns, and I have been working closely with Sky and Sam, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Blade. I'm with Procurement Services here at the City of Portland, and I'll be facilitating the RFP once it's ready to go out to all of you and can answer those questions.
All right, so we are looking forward to some feedback. Sarah will be helping me by reading out the chat. Please just let me know if I'm speaking too quickly. Some people have said that in previous meetings, so just let me know if I get on a roll and need to dial back with the speed. Taylor, will you please share the PowerPoint? Thank you. We're just going to go through a couple of these slides just for information purposes to make sure we're all on the same page. And then Sarah will be reading out some helpful chat questions and advice for us. So we also have someone taking notes for everything that's said and asked. So here's just our contact information. Feel free to email or call us. Those are all of our mobile phones and emails. And then we will also share this PowerPoint online and on our website. So you'll have that information. Next slide, please. All right, so this is an overview of all 5 resolutions. It's been in the news, and I know a lot of you have probably seen some of the public testimony and council testimony about it, but I'm just going to run through really quickly. So the first is to establish key actions to catalyze affordable housing construction. So 20,000 units of housing by 2033. The average wait list, I think people have probably seen in the news, is really long. So some of our data says 5 to 10 years on a waiting list. The second resolution is to enhance non-standard work options. So for folks who might not be ideal candidates for like a salaried work position, to establish some kind of contract positions and other work positions that could work for a larger swath of people. The third, which has gotten a lot of media attention, and a lot of the testimony was focused on this one, and is what we're focused on tonight, which is establishing designated camping sites around the city of Portland and connecting folks with mental health, physical health, and substance abuse recovery services. So especially the unhoused population. So we'll dig more into that one. The fourth was just setting budget priorities to implement all of these different pieces, work with other jurisdictions. So the state, the county, metro, and then also the federal government too. So lots of different asks for resources, but also services and expertise. The fifth was creating a diversion program for individuals experiencing homelessness. So that is currently in the works. We established a work group. We met for the first time last week. That's multi-jurisdictional approach as well. So city, DA, Multnomah County, DCJ, a lot of the different major players in that space. Taylor, next slide, please. All right, so why is this being proposed? It's impossible to connect all Portlanders experiencing outdoor houselessness with sanitary, mental health, and substance abuse recovery services. So that's the basis of all these resolutions. We have documentation that 800 self-sited unsanctioned encampments are across the city of Portland, encampment being 3 or more tents usually. So an estimated 94% of outdoor homeless folks reported in one Oregonian study from this year that they've never been offered shelter services or other services. So we want to make sure we're connecting more folks with those available services. Like I mentioned, the average wait time being 5 to 10 years from a home forward snapshot of data this year. Housing wait times create an opportunity for folks to get connected to really harmful synthetic drugs. So whether that is fentanyl or P2P meth, we've seen on the rise in the last couple of years that change in that recipe has really created a lot of mental health and meth psychosis issues. And then overdoses in general in Multnomah County are up 94% in the last 3 years, and fentanyl overdoses alone are up almost 600%. So we really want to get folks connected to services and in a healthier and more stable environment. And then we also have a study that shows that 63% of homeless Portlanders suffer from mental health issues. So along with that meth psychosis piece that I mentioned, there's a lot of folks who are just suffering from mental health issues and don't have access to services and the needed care that we can continue to grow as a city and a state and a county. But we have services available right now that we can offer folks if we can actually get them connected to those services. Taylor, next slide, please. So indoor shelter not being necessarily the preference for most folks that we encounter. So this is based on a few months of our outreach workers contacting different folks and asking them if they wanted to go into a designated indoor shelter, congregate shelter space that we had set aside by the joint office in the county. And 80% of folks did not accept that offer for indoor shelter space for various reasons. A lot of you know those reasons and have come into contact with folks who explain those reasons to you. We're trying to create another option for folks that they might be more interested in. So of those who turned down the offers for indoor shelter, outreach workers report that 7 out of 10 would accept an offer of space where they could camp with basic sanitation services and wouldn't be moved and could store their belongings, maybe have their pets there, their partner perhaps as well. Next slide, please. So the basic parameters of these camping sites. So we're designating 6 professionally managed camping sites with the city directly managing whatever provider for each of those sites. So it could be different providers for different sites. And each site will be located in a different geographical location around the city. So those will be spread out. And initially each site will have 100 tents. So I know the numbers have been kind of touted in the media and just in different conversations in different ways, but we're establishing 100 tents, which could be up to 150 people depending on if folks are in a couple or have multiple folks who want to stay in one tent. So city council has to approve any additional folks in any of those sites. So like additional 100 people for up to 250 people. And after this, that's after that first phase at each of those 6 sites. I'm happy to talk more about that if people are confused. Next slide, please. So our ideal amenities for designated camping sites, and we'd love to hear your feedback or thoughts on this, but this is just what we've heard in our research and conversations thus far. So 2 meals, full meals plus a snack every day is kind of what we're seeing as pretty standard for some of these sites. Obviously restrooms and showers, laundry access. So whether that's on site or nearby or how that's facilitated, we could determine depending on the site location and the available space. So a community space as well. Usually that includes a smoking area, additionally a pet area, storage for belongings, transportation or access to transit, so transit lines close by, electricity, obviously for phone charging, that's really important for folks, and then Wi-Fi, additionally really important, so folks can get in contact with family or with a potential job or whatnot. Perimeter fencing, and then regular trash collection and hazardous waste removal, also really important. Next slide, please. All right, so for good neighbor agreements, just a heads up on kind of our processes from the city side. So once a letter of intent, or LOI as we call it, for a site is signed between the city and a landowner, the city staff will meet with the surrounding neighborhood, business associations, and other stakeholders in the area to finalize a good neighbor agreement. The service provider who has been chosen for that specific site will contribute to and abide by that agreement, and we'd be putting in place for aforementioned policies to maintain a good relationship with that surrounding area. So that will be a coordinated effort. And the city will sponsor $250,000 for each neighborhood that has a designated campsite in their area, and business districts to acquire private security for the natural gathering around the site. So that might be main streets or transit stops, really depends, and it's very site specific. Next slide, please. So
Hey, Sky.
Yeah.
Sorry, really quick. There's
No worries.
a question in the chat. Will the campers be able to have a cooking area, or will they be able to cook at their own spot?
So there would not be cooking for campers in their own area or in their tent. That's for safety reasons. We don't want people with fires or kind of stoves at their tent. That's why we're providing meals. I think other alternative shelter sites have, like the Safe Rest Villages, have kind of a kitchen area and a microwave and places to kind of heat up some food. That's not something that we're anticipating with these specific sites, just because we're going to be providing those meals for folks. And then it looks like Michael Ryan, good to see you. Thanks for joining. About a curfew, I think that's definitely something that we need to talk about. I think that hasn't been determined as of yet, but there will definitely need to be specific rules for each site. And I know folks will be checked in and checked out probably at one entrance and exit. We found that to be kind of industry standard and pretty important. So whether there's an actual curfew, I think is to be determined. So ideal location attributes. So obviously, as much as possible, we're trying to distance these areas from residential areas, schools, business districts, and then near transit connections, like I mentioned. So obviously, we're looking at different areas around the city and different available spots. We want to balance them geographically. We're looking at about 2 to 4 acres. That seems to be the necessary size. And then also want to be mindful of adding designated camping sites to the total mix of the neighboring social services. So mapping out where shelters currently exist and other social services to make sure we're not adding another large sheltering area or site to an area that already has a lot of shelters or social services. Looks like,
And
Sarah,
there's 2 questions. So one from Welcome Home: if you're providing meals, how will you address diet needs, diabetic, allergies, etc.?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So looking at different providers for the food still, one that I've talked to already does some of this work for different shelters in Portland, and they do a vegan option and then a non-vegan option, basically. So those are the 2 that they find work the best, just because folks can be dairy-free or vegetarian, but a vegan option obviously serves their needs. I think if folks are not able to do the vegan option, that would be a larger conversation for that specific provider, but that's what they found actually really works well so far.
And then we have another question from Andy Goebel: say for staff or case management or office space for ongoing housing navigation on site.
Yes, so definitely we'll have that. I think that's essential. Thanks, Andy, for that question. We've seen that with the Safe Rest Villages. I think that's essential for any of these alternative shelter sites. So we want people to be able to meet with a case manager on site and have that specific safe area if they want to have some privacy for those meetings in order to get housing navigation. And we'll also have, obviously, we hope to have physical, mental, and behavioral health services there too. So definitely important to have all those community spaces and also office spaces.
From Dennis, we have: is there a plan for temporary exclusion matrix and re-entry process for folks who might have behavioral issues? For example, how long one might be asked to leave if they break an agreement or expectation?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and something that will need to be determined. I think I am trying to think through all those different pieces, so I really appreciate that feedback. And that's something that I think what we've seen from certain providers that I've talked to thus far is, if folks are a danger to themselves or others, that's definitely case specific. So, whatever needs they might have, that has to be addressed with that specific person, given their specific action or behavior. And so definitely person specific, but those rules I think will need to also be determined in terms of how long it takes to kind of be let back into that community for that community to feel safe within that designated camping site.
From Andrew Brown, we have: are the good neighbor agreements created with input from prospective providers?
Yeah, so I think that's a collaborative approach. Those good neighbor agreements, the business districts in the area, the neighborhood associations in the area, the service provider in question that's signed on for that specific site. Those are collaborative meetings that need to happen. And I think the city can be a part of that as well, maybe in the county.
From Sandra, we have: what will happen to people during extreme heat or extreme cold and during forest fires, smoke, and high winds?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you, Sandra. So I think we're looking at different spots kind of around the West Coast and around the country where folks have used different kinds of tents, different kinds of heating methods, different kinds of cooling methods to keep folks warm, safe, dry. Obviously, Portland is its own unique batch of weather issues. So I think we are definitely looking at different suppliers and what products actually really work for this area. And that will require further conversations with service providers in the area who are already doing this work.
And I'll just add, we're working also closely with the Bureau of Emergency Services at the city, who work closely with the county during those extreme events. And so we'll make sure that there are protocols in place. Next question from Kim. Some suggestions on additional amenities are: 1, a group warming area, given that no personal heaters or fires are allowed. Number 2, a private booth for telehealth care conversations. Third, a space for case manager and or healthcare service delivery. And 4, a group space for group recovery activities.
Yeah, thanks. Those are all, Kim, those are all great suggestions. And I think definitely some of those are already things that I've been trying to put on my list. So I will add all those other ones too. So thank you for those suggestions. I really appreciate that.
Okay,
All
next slide.
Taylor, next slide, thanks. So the potential RFP that we're still drafting will focus on alternative outdoor site operations and management, and the providers will be selected, potentially used for safe rest villages, sanctioned sites, and sanctioned RV or car camping sites. So it's a broad RFP for all of those potential sites. And then it'll have more information, obviously, on all of those pieces. This is kind of just the broad overview, but our proposed timeline as of right now is December 12th for the release of the RFP, and December 12th through 30th for the opening for people to actually respond, and then January 2nd through 13th for the evaluation period from Jeff's team, and then January 16th for announcing who is awarded.
And there's
then-
another question from Sandra. Where will you send people in mental health crisis if they are harming others? Will they be sent back on the streets? And if so, will they be fined or jailed for having to live outside in unsanctioned areas?
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. So that's something that we are in active conversations with the county about, just because they're the behavioral and mental health authority for us. So that's something that we need to talk about with the incoming chair, Jessica Vega Peterson, about, and just all those potential places for folks, depending specifically on their behavioral health or mental health needs. So I think it really is, again, person specific, action specific, medication specific. You know, every illness is kind of unique unto the person. So we just need to address that with medical professionals, and then also the county as the mental and behavioral health authority.
A question from Michael Ryan. We are hearing about security at these camps. Are the security folks well trained in de-escalation?
Yeah, thanks, Michael Ryan. So my vision, at least thus far from what I'm seeing from talking to different providers and talking to folks who are doing this kind of around the country, is that you actually really don't need private security in the way that we traditionally think about it. If you have kind of the 15-to-1 staff client ratio, or client staff ratio within these designated camping sites. So those staff would be trained in de-escalation and trauma-informed training. So that would not require private security in terms of like an armed guard or guards of any kind that we think of traditionally.
The next question is from Amy. Have any sites been identified yet?
So yeah, we're in discussions with different landowners and folks who are interested, but we will formally announce those as soon as we have those LOIs, like I mentioned, those letters of interest, to when that agreement is actually finalized. I don't want to jump the gun on that one.
All right, the next one's from Sandra. Currently, there are no available residential mental health beds available. Will the city invest in professionally staffed mental health related beds in advance of establishing these camps?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sandra. Thank you. I actually was just meeting with our government relations team earlier today about this exact issue. Like we were in a conversation last night where Representative Nose from the state legislature was really interested in expanding that residential treatment options. And then also I've been in conversations around the Behavioral Health Emergency Coordination Network, Beacon, with the county. That's an ongoing project as well. So I think those conversations are ongoing. We know we need to expand residential treatment beds throughout the city and honestly the state as well. So the governor-elect's office is also really interested in doing that and pushing that forward as well. So that's definitely also a simultaneous push. Next slide, please. I think, yes. Okay, so these are going to be the service provider requests. Would love your feedback on what you're thinking for all of these. These are just what we're thinking, and then would love your feedback. So I'm just going to read through these and then solicit your advice afterwards. So a service provider, we're thinking will manage these sites 24/7 with approximately that 15-to-1 staff client ratio, or client staff ratio, I should say. And using Built for Zero as like a client-centered public health approach for data collection to guide clients through that continuum of care. So to the points that we're all making about mental behavioral health and physical health needs, and then navigation to housing, what services folks need along that continuum. A referral-based system through the Street Services Coordination Center will be the way in which folks get connected to these designated camping sites. We won't allow walk-ins. And to start, there will be no strict time limit regarding the length of the stay. Some folks have been asking us that. We're not going to provide that strict requirement at first. So a service provider will coordinate with the designated city staff, the physical, behavioral, mental health visits from Multnomah County staff and other partners. So whether that's Cascadia Behavioral Health or a Central City Concern or whomever, we want those visits to be on site and regular. And we're anticipating a 3-year lifetime for each of these designated camping sites, so they're temporary. And then the key site rules, just from different conversations with different providers and seeing how these sites work in other places, similar sites. So alcohol and drugs can't be consumed in the common areas or the public spaces of these designated camping areas, and then no cooking or fire allowed. So to that question earlier, just for safety purposes.
And Sky, let's go through the 2 other sanctioned site management slides, and then we'll take questions.
Okay, perfect. Taylor, next slide, please. So security, weapons being checked at the entrance, 0 tolerance for that, just for safety purposes. And then if an individual needs to be excluded from a site, kind of to my point earlier, because the person is a clear and present danger for whatever reason to themselves or others. PPB's behavioral health unit is well versed in helping folks who are kind of in that state of crisis, as well as Portland Street Response. But then it really is person specific to my point earlier. So it'll really depend on what that person needs in that moment. The perimeter area, so a 24/7 hotline needs to be probably staffed by the service provider for complaints and questions about the site or perimeter issues. We've seen that from other locations around the country. That's a really important piece of the puzzle. Folks really want to have someone they can connect to who's on site. An on-site service provider will also patrol we're thinking 1,000-foot probably perimeter surrounding the site 16 hours a day, every day, so that there aren't folks who are kind of milling out into that 1,000-foot perimeter, camping, creating havoc for whatever reason, doing drugs out there, or leaving a lot of trash, hazardous waste, anything like that. So to that point, trash cleanup within that 1,000-foot perimeter at least weekly, and then obviously hazardous material will need to be removed immediately. And then a service provider would need to engage regularly with surrounding clients, businesses, and the enhanced service districts in that area, depending on if they have one or not. So obviously just regular engagement with the surrounding area would be paramount. Next slide, please. So parking, this is a question we've gotten a lot. Parking for any designated camping sites would be limited, and ideal sites would be serviced by that transit line that I'm talking about. So that's definitely something we're looking at for potential sites. So Max line would be ideal, but also bus lines we're looking at too. So definitely looking at all those TriMet lines. And then parking by clients would not be allowed within that 1,000-foot perimeter of the camp, just because obviously that could end up with a lot of different vehicles in that immediately surrounding area. And then we're also looking at sites for RV or car options that are a little more ideal for that specific thing with that specific space. So maybe folks could be directed to that kind of designated camping site if they have a vehicle. In terms of workforce, folks would need to be trained in that rigorous evidence-based, anti-biased, the trauma-informed de-escalation methods. It's just really important. And that workforce needs to be developed sustainably, because I know all of you, I hear all the workforce challenges right now amongst service providers locally and honestly around the country. We need to work with untapped workforce development, training processes, and really be very careful about not pulling from existing service providers, local service providers with any new service provision. And then obviously staff having a passion for the work is super important. So I think some questions, Sarah, do you want to go through?
Yeah, let's start from the top. So from Amy Thompson, are any smaller sites being considered with 10 to 25 individuals rather than 100?
So we're currently working on this kind of designated camping model, but obviously there are alternative shelter sites like the Safe Rest Village team that are working on those kind of smaller sites. I know that the village model of the 10 to 15 person model has been floated kind of by a lot of different folks and a lot of different nonprofits. And so we've actually facilitated a lot of the cutting through the red tape for the shelter siting with our emergency declaration and the state of emergency for housing. So I'm happy to dig into that more. If you want to email me, happy to do that.
And I'll just add, this RFP, as Sky covered a few slides back, is going to be more general than just the sanctioned sites. So if you are interested in managing a site that is fewer, that's something that could be identified in the response as well for the application.
Thanks, sir.
Next question from Laura is, why are walk-ins not allowed?
Yeah, so we want to make sure that there's a process by which folks can engage with outreach workers and get involved in these designated camping areas and not queuing up kind of in the surrounding area. It's more about that perimeter. And we want to just make sure that folks are getting connected to outreach workers to make sure that the designated camping site is kind of the shelter spot that works the best for them.
The next question is from Andrew. There was mention of staffing up primarily through offering higher wages than the rest of the system. What is that wage, and have you considered how that staff up will impact other system providers?
Yeah, I honestly don't think I'm looking at a wage that's that different from current standards. And I know that the county's going through a wage study for service provision in this space right now. And I know the joint office with the city and the county have increased some of those wages for different service providers. So it's definitely something we're looking at across the board. But I don't anticipate it's going to be a drain, that this service provision would necessarily be a drain on other local service providers.
The next question is, what type of data will be tracked regarding positive impacts for clients and community, and also complications or challenges for clients and community? How will data be shared?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of different dashboards that the city is working on right now. And so I anticipate that taking complaints or questions on that 24/7 hotline at the site notes would be taken on each call, and then we could input some of that information onto one of those dashboards. That's still to be determined, but I think that's a great idea.
Regarding wraparound services, will the selected service provider be allowed to subcontract some of these out, or will it be coordinated by the city or other outside organizations?
Yeah, I think that's to be determined. Definitely something to mention maybe in a potential RFP response. If you're only capable of contracting for part of something, or you want to work with someone else who's also willing to work with you, we're more than open to that discussion. So I think it would just depend on exactly which types of services you're willing to provide, and if it just creates kind of more hassle for all of the parties involved. So obviously the food, for example, would be a separate contract, and that's something the city is looking to contract with a nonprofit or a provider to provide those meals ongoing. So that's just one example, but we're also obviously working with Multnomah County on a lot of the health needs. So it's definitely something we're looking at. It's going to be a collaborative effort, a lot of different parties involved in each site.
The next question from Katie is, will there be sites specifically for women, LGBTQ+, and families?
Yeah, so actually I think one of the future slides that we have here mentions that we're working with our Safe Rest Village team and alternative shelter team to determine if we should make one of those alternative shelter sites specifically for gender specific or for a specific designated group of people. So that's definitely something we're looking into right now.
The next question from Scott is, a preponderance of unsheltered folks are elderly and or have significant physical disabilities, chronic illnesses, or injuries. How will the camps appropriately meet their unique needs?
Yeah, so great question. Thanks, Scott. So obviously these designated campsites aren't going to be perfect for each client. It's going to be for certain clients that make sense to be in those designated camping sites and want to be in those designated camping sites. There are other shelters and other transitional housing options for folks with specific needs. But to that end, I think we'll need to make sure that, just like the Safe Rest Village team has done, and we can learn and work with them, what disability needs and like ADA accessibility issues need to be worked out in those specific sites. So ramps to and from restrooms, anything like that totally will be worked out.
Next question is from Andrew. Can you articulate a model or theory of change for progressing participants out of houselessness? Are you funding a change in behaviors, resiliencies, capacity, or another metric?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm thinking through, just after a lot of conversations and a lot of research, is the continuum of care. So I think that's something that you all are well versed in. Just really connecting folks with those services to get them along that continuum and see which services they need to move and transition into permanent housing and get those, behavioral, physical, and mental health services that they need to succeed. It's also that workforce development, which was that second resolution, which I think is really important, really meeting folks where they're at with creating those available opportunities.
Next question is from Angela. How will you handle someone who walks in? Will you just turn them away, making them feel their needs are less important?
Yeah, no. So any service provider obviously would need to engage with that person and then also direct them to those available services. So we just want to make sure that folks aren't kind of queuing up waiting for an available spot in that designated camping site. But the service provider in question for any of those sites will do the outreach work that's already done by all the service providers that are local right now. So for any alternative shelter site, they have numbers, they have contacts, they can connect folks. And then transportation is also a huge part of what the Street Services Coordination Center has done, connecting folks with the available shelter space, and then also potential services. So that will definitely need to be a part of meeting their needs. We just don't want folks to necessarily think that the way to get into a designated camping site is to queue up right outside that space.
And let's go to the next slide, Sky, so we can make sure to get through all of them, and then we'll take the next series of questions.
So just information on city support for any potential service provider. The city is going to identify, acquire, and construct the sites. So that's not service providers' responsibility. And then the city will also be point for facility management of those sites and work directly with that service provider on that management. So the city will hire a director of charitable services to connect with those who want to support those living in sanctioned sites and donate materials, meals, etc. And then the city is working obviously with the DA's office to develop a diversion program, like I mentioned, with one of the resolutions that's aimed at connecting people with the services through a series of warnings and civil citations before any official offense is charged. So the city is also discussing creating that gender-specific shelter program with that Safe Rest Village team that I mentioned. One of those alternative shelter sites, perhaps. And then obviously funding is going to come from a variety of different sources. The city's fall budget monitoring process, the budget was passed today for those funds. So we have kind of a down payment on some of the construction of these sites and ongoing funding, but we're in active discussions with other jurisdictions about other funds as well. Next slide, please. Oh, perfect.
So let's go to some of the questions. So the next one is from Amy. Will there be funding for increasing behavioral health service capacity?
Yeah, so kind of to my point earlier, we're in active discussions with the county, the state, the federal government on increasing what we know is a behavioral health, mental health need in our city, but also across the state, honestly, and then really across the country. So that's definitely part of this. We, as the city, have just passed money for these specific designated camping sites, but are actively partnering with the folks who are really in charge of that behavioral and mental health care, which is the county, and then also the nonprofits in the area. So in those discussions, definitely think there needs to be more investment in those spaces.
The next one is, will the slide deck be shared?
Yes, on our website. So we have previous slide decks and iterations of this presentation, and then this one was more specific to the RFP as well and the service provider needs.
Next one from Michael is, how will you award prioritizing openings? What will be the referral or selection process?
Yeah, great question. So I think through outreach teams, that would need to be determined, but I honestly think it would be more of a first come, first serve with those outreach teams. So whatever beds are available in that designated site, then folks would get connected through the Street Services Coordination Center's outreach teams.
And then Barbara would request that we put the previous slide back on.
Oh.
So Taylor, if you can do that.
Did Barbara mean this previous slide or a previous slide? I don't know. Sorry, Barbara.
All right, let's go to the next one, and Barbara, you can let us know. Sandra asked, what will happen to individuals who are kicked out of the camps? Will they be subject to fines and arrest when they are not allowed to be in sanctioned areas?
Yeah, Sandra, I think I spoke to that earlier. So it's really going to be person specific, action specific. So, if someone is a danger to themselves or others and is kicked out of the site, they obviously need to be connected with services. They need to be connected with some help. But that specific help that's necessary will be person and situation specific. So I can't anticipate necessarily what that hypothetical would be, but for example, if people need medical help, people need behavioral health help, that would require some medical professionals.
And Barbara, we're driving to the slide. Next question from Scott. Can you walk us through the process? Someone from the outreach team approaches someone who is illegally camping. What's next? Are they screened for camps at that moment? If they refuse to comply, then what? If they are deemed unqualified, then what?
Yeah, so great question. So short answer is to be determined, but part of the work of the resolutions is that diversion work group that I was talking about, and that diversion program is still being stood up. So some of that work is ongoing with different partners, but I can say outreach workers and increased outreach workers, that part of the resolution plan was funded by this fall bug process. So we're going to be hiring more outreach workers and also partnering with the county with their outreach teams. So folks would be offered services. Ideally, certain folks would get outreach multiple times. Building that relationship is super important, as I know all of us know. And so that would be part of that outreach. Offered different services, different available shelters. So ideally, folks who are doing that outreach would have knowledge of the shelter availability that day, which shelters, which type of shelter, and depending on that person, their specific needs, they'd be connected to the relevant services. So then if folks wanted to go to Congregate or go to a designated camping area, or wanted to be connected to Hooper Detox or something to that end, we could make that connection, provide transportation. But the rest of, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sky, keep going.
I was just going to say that the diversion work group is still working with the DA's office, Multnomah County, DCJ, like I mentioned, on what that looks like in terms of getting folks connected to those services, and then maybe waiving some previous offenses, expunging some records in order to encourage folks to get connected to those services and stay in shelter.
The next one is from Sandra. Who will be liable insurance-wise for injuries, assaults, suicides, or death inside the camps?
Yeah, great question, Sandra. So obviously service providers would have insurance, but so would the city attorney's office is definitely going to be part of that discussion, kind of all the insurance needs that are required. That will have to, that's above my pay grade and will need to be determined in conjunction with the city attorney's office, but definitely a lot of insurance needs for exactly what you're talking about.
The next question is from Andy. Still trying to wrap my head about staying warm. What do campers do for heat in their tents? Is question one. And number two, is the city providing tents or do people bring their own?
So yes, we will be providing tents and probably some kind of storage container, cot, sleeping bag, that kind of situation. Still to be determined. We're still looking at the available suppliers and what makes the most sense. But to your first question, Andy, I think that's still something we need to work out in terms of what makes the most sense for Portland. We've seen what works in Denver, in LA, and San Francisco, and different sites, but around the country, but each have their unique weather issues. And especially with climate change, we just need to be prepared for all eventualities as well. So looking at which different tents make sense, communal warming areas, like someone mentioned earlier, might be a really interesting idea. I know that in LA, they kind of had like a sprinkler system set up for misting, kind of for folks if it got too hot. Obviously, that's something that they have to deal with heat. So all of those different pieces need to be determined and figured out. We need to figure out what the best supplies are for the specific sites given our specific needs in Portland, especially, obviously some kind of larger rain prevention kind of tarp or tent above the tents maybe. So it's just an ongoing discussion that we'll need to talk to different service providers about what works here, but also what's available in terms of supplies.
Next question is from Dennis, and he's asking if you can explain the referral process. If outreach teams or youth shelter staff encounter young people who want to stay at the sites, who would they contact to make that happen in real time?
So I'm anticipating these sites to be adult sites, so 18 and older. If folks are younger than 18, that institutes kind of a different process. So maybe DHS gets involved, and I know that there are certain youth shelters. We probably talked to New Avenues for Youth and Janus and all those different youth providers that have those youth specific shelter sites.
The next question is, from Welcome Home, are the locations being looked at close to hospitals, grocery stores, and other important resources?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Thank you. So definitely grocery stores are an important part, just like we're looking at transit lines. I think the hope with transit lines is that folks can get connected to all of those potential services depending on what meets their needs. So they have access to transportation. But yes, obviously having an idea of what medical help is in the area and different services in terms of food provision, convenience stores, grocery stores, all the like.
The next question is from Ren. What happens if the camps are full and there are no other shelter beds?
Yeah, so that is something that we're actively working on to try to expand our current shelter offerings and get all those funded shelter beds, especially the congregate shelter beds, open for folks to use. And then this is adding to that continuum. But obviously we have an ongoing issue of folks really needing places to stay. And when they accept and want those places to stay, what happens when we run out of shelter space? So I think that's just an ongoing issue for Multnomah County and the city of Portland, and will be an ongoing issue for the joint office as well. So trying to create as many shelter spots as we possibly can.
The next question is from Andrew. How are you going to support providers on the front end with understanding funding reporting? This looks like a blended and braided fund source with varying degrees of rigor required for each. Will there be a low barrier reporting threshold, or will providers be required to meet the individual fund requirements?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just listening to Sarah and not actually reading these questions, so I probably missed part of that. But yes, I think the city can probably help, and our folks can help with different reporting requirements for the different funding aspects. We will help the service provider manage those camps. So we can help and assist with technical issues like reporting for funding. I know the federal funding requirements are different, and so that's totally an understandable issue, but the funding will be provided for us, and then the service provider will contract with the city.
And Andrew, I would just add, our goal is to make the funding reporting uniform. So if there is a site that is primarily funded through ARPA federal funds, that would be the one that's going to be the federal fund piece. We wouldn't try to spread the ARPA money across 3 camps and then braid in general fund plus other partner funds. So we would try to keep it as kind of individualized in terms of funding stream by site, just for an ease for everyone involved. So that would be our attempt as well. The next question is from Amy. How will the camps ensure they are welcoming and serving BIPOC communities and other groups who are disproportionately impacted by homelessness and are less likely to access congregate shelters and large camps?
Yeah, I think great question. So that's part of our outreach effort, and outreach workers will definitely be trained in kind of those inequitable access to services, and make sure they're offering services to folks all around the city and not just in concentrated areas, but all around different neighborhoods, and really working with different providers who have those relationships already, and outreach workers who have those relationships with folks. So I think it's definitely something that our outreach workers will be trained to think through and work with folks on.
The next one is from Sean. Have you considered employment services as part of the service engagement package for these sites?
Yeah, so that second resolution, Sean, was about workforce development. So we're working with Work Systems Inc., which has they have some ARPA funds to develop different non-standard work opportunities. And that's definitely something that we want to get folks connected to, as well as other programs that already exist. Honestly, I know Central City Concern has some great programs and others. So we're not trying to reinvent those programs that already exist. We're just trying to add to that continuum and connect folks to those available services.
The next question is from Welcome Home. Have you calculated how much will be spent per campsite?
Yeah, so we have we're calculating like estimates, but it's really going to be site specific. So construction of a site obviously will depend on where that site specifically is, whether the ground needs to be leveled, something like that, all those specific construction site needs. But we're getting some ballpark numbers based on other sites around the country, and then obviously working with our Safe Rest Village team just on how they've calculated their alternative shelter site costs. But also Sarah is our resident expert in that, so she can probably speak more articulately to that as well.
No, and I'll just add, we're using the Safe Rest Village as kind of a base model for a lot of the capital and then operating costs as they are further along in a lot of the alternative shelter development. So I would estimate it's somewhat similar. But then again, it's going to depend on the ratio per client. So we are asking for that higher ratio. So that would be reflected in the budget. The next question is from Angela. Most campers have pets, dogs or cats. Will you limit how many pets a camper can have? And will you limit how many you allow at each site?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think honestly to be determined, definitely pets are a huge part of why a designated camping site is preferred amongst certain folks. And there would need to be specific pet areas. A dog run, for example, we've seen work at other sites as well. So if an individual is comfortable having multiple pets in their tent and with them at all times, that would just need to be a conversation, obviously, that folks would have, depending on what pet it is and how much space they feel like they have.
And I would add we would hope though that one of the pieces of partnership would be with, the county and animal services to ensure any pets in the camp, they would have to be up to date on vaccinations and tags for that. And so that would be a service that would be provided. Next question from Laura is how do the people at the site actually get connected to case management and services to get placed in housing?
Yeah, so we're anticipating having care coordination on site with folks who would connect with other kind of case managers. So housing case managers and do some of that housing navigation, but also work with the experts who already exist. So through the county, we're hoping to partner with service provision of physical, behavioral, mental health needs, and then also housing navigation. So folks would come on site. That's why that office space is really necessary if folks want to have a private conversation with that case manager.
Laura also asks, is there a detailed budget for this project?
So yeah, again, we're working on estimates right now, but it's going to be site specific. So that budget will be determined by whichever site we choose. But that money that was just approved today is what we think can cover about a few of these kind of designated camping sites. So we're thinking that can cover capital and ongoing for about 3 sites.
The next question from Laura is, has there been any discussion around involving members of the community and peers in the management of these camps, or will that be service provider specific?
Yeah, so those 2 community kind of conversations that we've already had that Sam mentioned earlier, this conversation plus more conversations and obviously conversations with the houseless community or those with lived experience is an important part of this discussion. We're hoping to host more of these discussions and then maybe other styles of discussions, and then also have those conversations offline. So definitely lots of engagement. Again, please look at our contact information on the first slide and feel free to reach out as well. So.
We're up on time. We want to be respectful of time. We will send out these slides tomorrow, and they'll also be posted on the mayor's website. Please continue to provide us with your questions, your ideas, your concerns as we move forward, and get this out to others that might not have been able to join us tonight. We really are committed to making this a successful endeavor, And so you can help ensure that by continuing the conversation as we move forward. So thank you all very much, and please stay in touch. Good night.
Thank you.